Kevin, Director of the Furious Flower Poetry Center, and this is our second reading of the semester. And we got off to a great start with Dominique Christina. And I'm sure you are in store for something wonderful today. Thank you for braving the weather, the remnants of Hurricane Michael, so you can come here and get a taste of Hurricane Cyrus. Hurricane Cyrus, yes. So it's wonderful to see you all. We had a great afternoon. He did a workshop with staff and faculty and students this afternoon. And I see some of you here, so thank you for coming back. So, without further ado, and we do have a microphone coming. Okay. I see some loyal people out there. I see members of Word is Born. Where are you? Yay, yay. Thank you. And yeah, this is the best.
You'll be heard. You'll be heard.
Yes, and so in order to get us started, I would like to introduce to you the Assistant Director of the Furious Flower Poetry Center, who will do the official welcome of our illustrious poet, Lorna Lee.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much again for coming. Thank you to Dr. Tay's class for doing the survey that will help us get grants that allow us to bring amazing poets like Cyrus Cassells to campus and to Harrisonburg. So again, I want to reiterate, please stick around and fill it out before you go. It is my pleasure to introduce Cyrus Cassells. He is the award-winning author of 6 books of poetry, including The Mud Actor, which won the 1981 National Poetry Series Award, Soul Make a Path Through Shouting, which was nominated for the Pulitzer and won the William Carlos Williams Award, Beautiful Signor, which is my favorite, winner of the Lambda Literary Award, and most recently, The Gospel According to Wild Indigo, which is a beautiful book about which poet Ellen Hinsey writes, and then this is her quote, "At a time of spiritual uncertainty, America's most important lyric poet offers us a gospel on the ways of the world and the spirit. These poems, rooted in the experience of the enslaved, but also the free spirit, come and lift us up." What does the gospel according to Wild Indigo teach us? In these beautifully crafted poems, we learn that darkness is of our own making, and that the potential splendor of the spirit lies always within our scope, resident in the magnificence of the natural world and in the possibility of human communication, eros, and reconciliation. At this most unlikely of moments, the gospel according to Wild Indigo comes to our rescue. And I felt I needed to read that whole thing because it's just so beautiful. I add to that by saying Cyrus's poems are instructions in beauty with an unmatched lushness of language. They're expansive, spanning time and geography, taking their readers to Mediterranean coasts, to Italy, to Spain, to the Carolinas, to the death camps of World War II, bringing to bear the beauty and the brutality those places carry in their soil and their skies. The poems also take us inward, move us through the wild and unmappable regions of the heart, daring us in poems like The Risk Takers from Beautiful Signor to, and this is a quote from his poem, "Walk with me in the world's crucible heat and promise. Make this love possible as all things are possible." The risk of taking the leaps the poem asks us to make are repaid 100-fold. For as we follow the poet's voice and embark on the journey he invites us to join him on, we are transported. We become the slave woman who names her daughter Iris, claiming for her beauty and freedom. We are the son who loses a father, who loves the torch like men, who has taught him the past the rueful glitter of lucre and guns. With the poet, we face the once wolfish ovens and become students of those history would forget or discard. And again, another quote, the those of the confiscated shoes and swift shorn hair. But the greatest reward is at the journey's end, when we return to our skins, our lives, our realities, expanded, exhilarated, educated, energized. How his poems allow us to see the world we inhabit anew, and then show us anew to ourselves as inhabitants of that world, inviting us to look at ourselves through the poet's own probing and empathetic eyes. Again, a quote: "How quick we are to worship what is outside our own skin, never gleaning our own radiance." Some of us were able to experience that today in the workshop. And I also had the good fortune of having Cyrus as a teacher at the Kavikana workshop a long, long time ago. We won't count the years. And I knew that he would be a wonderful guide for that workshop today, and I'm so excited to share him and his work with you. So please join me in welcoming him to Harrisonburg, to JMU, and to the Fierce Flower Poetry Reading Series.
That was so beautiful, I just had to take it in a little bit there. Well, again, thank you for braving the rain and getting here. I'm grateful to be here. So today I'm going to start with I'm a translator of Catalan poetry, and I have a book of Catalan poems coming out in the spring called Still Life with Children. The poet is Francesc Parcerisas, who's considered the main poet of Catalan Spain. And this is maybe my favorite of his poems. It's called Act of Gratitude. Thank you, angel. Thank you, demons of the night. Thank you, winter, season in which the heart burns, dry tree trunks of desire. Thank you, bracing cold light, nocturnal water. Thank you, midnight bile, laurel of morning, hoopoe of dawn. For what's odd, unexpected, wild, for evil and pain, thank you. For the sum of what we are and are not. For all we avoid and all we crave. Thanks for the lush words, love and silver, for yourself and myself. Thank you for yes and for no, for the ability to give thanks and for rendering them unnecessary. Thanks for fear, for bread and oil, for the nighttime. Thank you for lovemaking at the break of day, for the coin discovered on the ground, for your hand on my cheek, the gush of the fountain. Thank you for your eyes and lips, for crying out my name with joy. Many thanks, death, for your existence, for making all these things more vivid inside me, so very yours, so beautiful, brimming, and complete. So that's Francesc Parcerisas. Thank you. I think I'm going to whisk us to Mexico. Years ago, I got invited to a total eclipse, and then at the last minute, I couldn't go. So my friends taped the eclipse. So I wrote this poem based on the tape. Didn't actually see it. It's called The Ruins in Total Eclipse. It's in Monte Alban, Mexico. Yes, we're here in the perishing light. Creator, destroyer, take it, take back the day, where the peaceable kingdom goes wild, where even with their paramount spirit-catching tools, snare of cameras, tapes, we hear a sound escape our lips, like the hiss of plump corn roiling in a pot, ancient hiss at the monstrous swift shadow of the moon, hurtling over the livelong temples. Here it comes, shrouding our summer flesh. Goosebumps, red horizon, above the shock-proof pyramids, rebellious stars. A playful Englishman exclaiming, "My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun, but now there is no sun." Laughter, a pious woman pleading for reverence, cathedral silence, boos, then a cannon going off, and somewhere beyond it, all the bells in Oaxacan villages starting to toll. Some of us whistling conch horns, some of us shouting fireworks, echoes of drums, some of us starting to weep at the sudden night, giddy with awes milk, here in this thrilling imperial nowhere, given measureless time, all the magic calendars sheeted, now indivisible from Tuesday, indivisible from centuries before Cortez. On this day, my nude coach is a crocodile of stone. On this day, I am bitten, broadcast like a luckless fish tossed by hungry pelicans, an eagle-eaten heart. On this day, I consult far-seeing scientist iguanas with their calculus of flies in ancient observatories, in rooms of solemn stone. On this day, I watch bustling friars, conquistadores set fire to sacred fig bark scrolls. Oh, the lies, the begrimed centuries. But on this day, memory will not be burned. On this day, let me kneel and weep into the shores, regiments of clear turquoise. On this day, on this day. Look, look, before commerce and pain and history begin again, before bat dancers, their mock wings brimming with myriad tiny mirrors, catch the Lazarus intact gleams. Have these abracadabra rays of the corona, this manna-kind diamond handed down from the houses of magic, down from the ever-giving sky. Have this rare, unbartered ring, whoever you are. So I'm going to get into my latest book, The Gospel According to Wild Indigo. And I don't know how familiar you are with Gullah culture. You're not so far away from South Carolina, right? The Gullah culture of the descendants of the rice and indigo slaves. So the sequence is set in Charleston in the Sea Islands. And some of you are not aware that Gullah is actually another dialect, or some people consider it a language. It's all in the present tense. There is no future or past tense. And a lot of the words are kind of, I think they're called portmanteau words. Like the word for sunrise is day clean, and I've organized this sequence around the word day clean. So the first poem in the sequence is Day Clean. Day clean's the Gullah word for the gala sun, the looked-for melon, meticulous, up-and-coming, impossibly hale, ecstatically gilding the Canaan of marshlands, low country cosmos of scurrying punch clock crabs, dauntless kingfishers, frolicking estuary herons. Day clean caresses the praise houses, yo-ho, yo-ho. A's boy-time treehouse, nestled in a Galahad ancient oak. Gold takes to street musicians, dented coronet. Why is he still up? Why is he still playing? Burnishes the early bird fingers on a Mount Pleasant porch. Tea-brown Merlin fingers, fashioning palmetto roses, palmetto crosses, crab castle, Jew's harp, foxglove, sea junk, marsh bridge, stilt house, the white of hominy and fine sifted flour, Ladies Island, Cat Island, Tefusky, St. Helena. Rummaging gold matter-of-factly gleans them all, shell colors and dories, rugged shrimp cellars and wind-blessed reeds, rapacious gold. Day clean, sun like a schoolgirl, eager for show and tell. Here's another poem that uses the word day clean. There's a character in this sequence. There are 18 individual poems whose name is Augustus, but people usually just call him A. And this is called A's Childhood. Day clean. The mornings were moss-laden and mule-headed. Kingdom of consoling porch swings and steeping sun tea. Kingdom of throat-slick okra. The mornings were mud play and faux cannon fire in a makeshift fortress of Spartina. A gullah flourish of gathered starfish in an heirloom sweetgrass basket. If you weren't hawk-eyed, the tantalizing but turncoat sea could pick your pockets, the gypsy-fingered sea. Filched forever, the ward-away treble catbone, beachfront boy, the careworn buffalo nickel. Summoned in the first gold hours, A's usually rake-hell hands, alongside his robust grandmother's, were lima-shelling hands, and the music of how do and I recollect. The epigraph for the whole sequence is from the poet Wallace Stevens, a really tiny poem called In the Carolinas, just 2 lines. The pine tree sweetens my body, the white iris beautifies me. So I took each line and used it as the title of a poem. So this is the first line, the pine tree sweetens my body. As pine needles coalesce with bulrush and sweetgrass, Augustus, to shore a cherished sea island basket, so it seems the fortifying, peace-granting pines have been nonchalantly woven into my days. Out of childhood and enmeshing memory, they appear, co-dreamers, immobile shepherds, surely. From a precocious roving boys, eager to learn vantage, not as supreme as a giraffe, oh no, but just as heaven-reaching. For the inveterate pines, perhaps, the crab-ruled low-country marshes have always been arresting theaters, whatever was shouted or gasped at Jubilee, at the silver point of the bridegroom's climax, or the baby's crowning, they ably cast in their commanding branches, so that if I lay my hardy boy ear to the telltale bark, as I did the tobacco-scented summer I was 9, some long dead singing from vanished dooryards, from cabins and heart-stopping fields, supper getting ready songs hummed in pie cooking heat, is still ensconced in the pine. Now, some of the poems are in the voices of slaves, and this is one of them. Caesars and Dreamers. The pharaohs of rice and indigo, the conniving Caesars of cotton, what were we to them? Profitable. Able bodies from Barbados and the windward coast, the rice coast, our souls ramshackle less than a rooster's or a rock's. And yet, in painstaking fields, in joyous praise houses, our tenacious go down Moses, our stirring rallying in the beauty of the lilies Christ was born across the sea, might have served as proof to those zealous southern despots that we possessed some quilt scrap of God. Go tell those greed-swayed kings of sugar, those implacable princes of tobacco, how we garnered freedom in our hard-scrabbled dreams, sang it as sweat-drenched, unshakable hallelujah, whispered it as healing salve to allay the defiling stripes on our backs. unstinting overseer, iron-eyed Caesar, who better to define freedom than a slave? Here's another poem in the voice of a slave's Wild Indigo, because when rice was our nemesis and callus making cotton and the onus of a Satan-hot tobacco seemed to stain our very souls, beyond the spirit-choking pest houses of Sullivan's Island, our Ellis Island, beyond the dust and ragtag squalor of Slave Row, we found a dew-soaked purplish blue in the needed time. Imagine in a siren patch behind the blacksmiths, a God-sent and doe wild blue. And at one point I have the indigo actually speak, and let's hear what they have to say. The wild indigo. Let's see. A siren patch of indigo. Listen, though we swell as rampant woodland or riverbank blossoms, Baptisia australis, in your tensile world, as commonplace beauty and reachable remedy, as soothing eyewash for the Osage, hardy dye for the Cherokee. Quiet as it's kept, we're more akin to clearing and hillside wayshowers, offhand riots quietly reminding you the punishing rose, the grim night world of the Middle Passage was never your true province. Even in appalling chains, the light of your integrity, your inmost wonder, still encircled you, resolute, inviolate. Always recall, dear progeny of Sea Island slaves, in galling dearth or in Juneteenth glory, our deep, annealing, sacramental blue belongs to you. And here's the other poem that I created from the Wallace Stevens lines. The white iris beautifies me. And I sent this out to Lauren. The white iris beautifies me. Not the white of hard-won cotton or a pitiless snow. I found a whiteness that gives me its glory. It blooms in Master Belmare's garden, and though it is, by all accounts, untouchable, quiet as it's kept, I've carried it into the shabbiest of cabins, worn it as I witnessed the slave breaker, the hanging tree. In dream snatches it blesses me, and I become more than a brand, a pretty chess piece. At the mistress's bell, always prudent and afraid, wily and afraid. And when the day comes, my rescuing flower's name will become my daughter's, a freeborn woman. I swear she will never be shoeless in January snow. Bold iris, she will never fear sail or the bottom of the sea. Thank you. How many of you have read Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon? Do you know about the legend of the flying black folks? That you had to do a little chant, Kumbabayala, Kumbabayaga, and then you would fly back to Africa. So this is a poem about that. It's called Moon Huggers. Amid cabin whispers of breakneck renegades, invisible maroons, wind-ferried Africans, cornered, enchained, we let magic become our ammunition. From witnessing Carolina pines, abetting bobwhites reminded us in forest code of the incantation tucked failsafe behind our misery, that at some unmanning moment we might rally and soar from the tethering plantation in one moon-hugging, star-scouting, soul of a night hawk leap, past sundering marketplaces, bought and sold and bought and sold and bought and sold, gliding east, moon, 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 with an unpredicted glee. Let's see, what else want to read from this sequence here? Well, for the longest time, I didn't know what the gospel according to Wild Indigo was. It was a phrase that came to me. I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. But it took me a few years to figure out what it might be. So I'm going to read the title poem, which is also the last poem in it. And then probably there's hurricanes in it there, okay. The Gospel According to Wild Indigo. In time, the sea-loved Carolinas, the spade and hoe land, which was our break-soul yoke and lament, became, so help us, our land. On Ladies Island, Cat Island, Defusky, St. Helena, Ham's unlauded children, broken and unbroken, we waded in the mothering water, garnering the Moses wise, Marcia's secrets, the irrepressible crab's broadcasts. Under the dipper dreamers, singers, we let ancient oaks counsel us, mossy Abrahams and Isaacs. From pliant sweetgrass we coaxed mint new forms of utility and beauty. We learned resilience. Who better to define freedom than a slave? A taproot waiting from the Gospel According to Wild Indigo, in which death and defiling bondage are transformed into foam and fish scale blue, a heron swoop, and bold-fisted hurricanes dismantle the master's belligerence. Our prophet-smashing owners, our slyly disowning fathers, they told us we had no rights to the dawn and gave us first instead the Gorgon's heart of the hold, thick as black-strapped syrup. But here it comes. Can we get a witness? Here it comes with a renegade swiftness. Yo-ho, yo-ho, night-yoked mother, never defeated brother, sister, inspiriting, down to the wire, immaculate as a deacon's gloves. Day clean. Let me see what else from this project. For some reason, I want to go back to my second book and what has really become my most famous poem, most anthologist poem, called Soul Make a Path Through Shouting. It's about Elizabeth Eckford, who was a student who was desegregating the high school at Little Rock. You may have seen footage of her before. Have people seen that footage? It's truly amazing. She's just walking through the screaming, howling crowd of other white kids who don't want her to go to school. And the good news is for me was that Elizabeth finally got the poem. Her biographer brought the poem to her. And sometimes the things you write in solitude actually reach people. Soul Make a Path Through Shouting. For Elizabeth Eckford, Little Rock, Arkansas, 1957. Thick at the school gates are the ones rage has twisted into minotaurs, harpies, relentlessly swift. So you must walk past the pincers, the swaying horns, sister, sister, straight through the gusts of fear and fury, straight through. Where are you going? I'm just going to school. Here we go to meet the hydra-headed day. Here we go to meet the maelstrom. Can my voice be an angel on the spot? An amen corner. Can my voice take you there? Gallant girl with a notebook, up from the shadows of gallows trees. to the other shore, a globe bathed in light, a chalkboard blooming with equations. I've never seen the likes of you, pioneer in dark glasses. You won't show the mob your eyes, but I know your gaze, steady on the North Star, burning. With their jerry-rigged faith, their spear of the American flag, how could you dare to believe you're someone sacred? Nigger bareheaded girl, where are you going? I'm just going to school. Maybe a beautiful senor poem for Lauren, since that's her favorite book. It's a book of love poems. I always told my students that they should feel free to write love poetry. And I was talking with the workshop this morning. Most of us, our first poems are about love trouble. We're trying to make sense of what some crazy romance that we have. We're trying to understand it. So what finally had to happen to me was when I first went to Italy, I was on a terrible plane flight over the Atlantic. It was a big plane. It really started shaking and everything, so I thought, okay. And the guy who was next to me had totally pissed me off. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to die next to this person who completely pissed me off. And before I got on the plane, I remember having this feeling like I was stepping off of a cliff, right? A friend of mine gave me a little tiny, like pocket-sized love sonnets of William Shakespeare. So that's what I was clutching, and the plane was knocking us around. I'm just thinking, God, if I could just live long enough to write a love poem, right? It's like, God, okay. It's like, so I made a kind of bargain with God that I would live and write. So this is a poem about that. And the guy, we made friends afterwards. We're like, okay, I guess you're a good person after all. But I was actually worried about him because he was in the bathroom, But literally, it was like the middle of the night. It's not something I wish on you or anybody to wake up in that situation. You just can't believe it's happening. It's called The Bargain. In the transatlantic fury, when I feared I might not survive to see Florence, clutching an elfin love sonnets of Shakespeare, I implored, Lord, let me live long enough to dare a love poem. In time, of course, the sky stopped glowering, and in the Tuscan summer's imperial segue into autumn, poetry burgeoned. It's not only the act of grace, the glory between us. These praise songs spring from a holy bargain, from my deepest desire to live. Yes, I'm still here. Here's the title poem. As I was writing these poems, I was kind of using like the old romantic troubadour model, and then gradually I realized that I was also writing about the idea of the beloved, which is really more of a Sufi concept, that you could, one of the paths to God is through loving another person and having that person represent God or the sense of divinity. So this is the title poem, and I found a beautiful quote by Yeats. All dreams of the soul end in a beautiful man's or woman's body. Beautiful, Senor. Whenever we wake, still joined, enraptured, at the window, each clear night's finish, the black pulse of dominoes, dropping to land. Whenever we embrace, haunted, upwelling, I know a reunion is taking place. Hear me when I say, our love's not meant to be an opiate, or an opioid, okay, an opiate. Help me, you are the reachable mirror that demands integrity, that dares me to risk the caravan back to the apogee, the longed-for arms of the beloved. Dusk's of paper whites, dusk of jasmine, intimate beyond belief. Beautiful Senor, no dread of nakedness. Beautiful Senor, my longship, my opulence, my garland. Beautiful Senor, extinguishing the beggar's tin, the wind of longing. Beautiful Senor, laving the ruined country, the heart wedded to war. Beautiful Senor, the kiln blaze in my body, the turning heaven. Beautiful Senor, you cover me with pollen. Beautiful Senor, into your sweet mouth. This is the taproot against all strictures, desecrations. I'll never renounce, never relinquish the first radiance, the first moment you took my hand. This is the endless wonderlust, dervish. Yours is the April upon April love that set me spinning, even beyond your eventful arms, toward the unsurpassed, the one vast claiming heart, the glimmering, the beautiful and revealed Senor. So that's for Lauren. I'm just going to read two more poems. An old poem from the beginning of my career, given I started talking about dervishes. When I was a little boy, my father used to put on Ravel's Bolero, and I would spin around like a dervish. If you know the music, it gets faster and faster. And I don't understand why I did that, but I was like a mini dervish from the start. This is a poem that's dedicated to my Spanish teacher, Concepcion Horba, who was my greatest teacher when I was growing up. And it's called Duende. I don't know if you've ever heard of Duende. It's a concept that they use in flamenco culture. It means like a goblin, but it's if you perform with a particular power and intensity, they say that person has Duende. There's something supernatural about their performance. So we discussed the concept of Duende, and she said, "Oh, Cyrus, you have Duende." I go, I don't know about that. But the thing that I thought of that I did that had Duende was this dancing, this dervish dancing that I did as a child that became a kind of a form of family entertainment. Like, oh, you think your kid's talented? Look at my kid's like a dervish dancer here. So this poem is called Duende. It's a short lyric. Above the sill, the moon is burning. Softly within the house, the bolero begins with its deep magnetic sounds, and I rise from my chair, driven to dance. I spread my arms and start to spin around the room alone. As a child, I danced like this. A dervish dancing toward the ledge of God, turning before my astonished family, never dizzying. And now I seem to hear your voice as though you said to me again, "Tienes duende." Cyrus, you have the duende. Always I dance till the duende works my body, suddenly aware of each small death and birth of myself, while I spin miraculous as a blind man who senses the moonlight brighten the brim of a well. And for my final poem, I'm going to go back even farther in my childhood to the beginning. This is a poem for my mother about scattering her ashes. Elegy with a gold cradle. Now that you're forever ministering wind and turquoise ashes, eclipsed by the sea's thrust and the farthest tour, I know you were always more than my mother. Giveaway flecks tipped and scattered from an island palisade, now that you're a restless synonym for the whistling fisherman's surfacing mesh, the alluring moon's path and progress through a vast chaos of unrelenting waves, let me reveal, in the Adalos days following your scattering, In my panoramic hotel, I found a sun-flooded cradle, so pristine, so spotlit and sacramental, beside my harbor-facing bed. I couldn't bear to rock or even touch it, Mother. I marveled at the gold-leafed bars and contours, the antique wood beneath, an emblem of unbeatable hope and prevailing tenderness. Then, for a crest-like hallowing hour, my morning was suffused with the specter of your lake-calm cascade of hair, inkwell dark in the accruing shadows, your rescuing, soothing contralto, and oh yes, Isabel, the longed-for fluttering of my nap-time lids, entrancing gold of the first revealing dawns, the first indispensable lullabies. Thank you. So, any questions? Did you want to? Are we going to do a Q&A, or what are we going to do here?
Yes, we're going to do a Q&A, and
Okay.
so you can have a moment to collect yourselves and your questions. Please, students, pass out these surveys. Wasn't that fantastic? You know, Cyrus, you're like a cultural historian.
All right, I'll take that.
Yeah. No, really, really, if you were listening very closely, you learned a lot about South Carolina and Gullah culture. And let's just see for a second. We're gonna take 1 minute to see how much you gathered.
It's not a quiz.
Yeah, well, you know, it's not gonna be graded. But just, you know, what did you pick up about South Carolina culture from the gospel according to Wild Indigo? Go on.
I mean, I didn't know that there was a whole different dialect during those times.
I didn't read the parts of the poem. You know, when people were kids, they were fined in school for speaking the language.
Really?
Yes. Often what happens with the effort to kind of unify folks, they decide, well, everybody has to speak the same language or same words. For instance, I read a poem by Frances Parcerisas. His language was banned from public use for 30 years when Franco came to power at the end of the Spanish Civil War. So he started out as a prodigy in fiction, and then by the time he was 26 years old, his language was banned from public use. So he became a poet after those years, and he became like the guardian of his own language, and he didn't know whether it was dying out.
Yeah.
It's like my friend Natalie Diaz, who just won a MacArthur grant. She's a Mojave Indian, and she's been putting together a dictionary of her own language, right? So what we learn, I think, is that whatever dialect or language has its own specific window on the world, and that it deserves to be preserved and treasured, right?
How did you go about researching?
Gullah culture? I didn't tell you this story, but I was actually an actor playing a Gullah man. And even though I partially grew up in North Carolina, my mom's from Fayetteville, I'd never been to South Carolina. And because it's a 2-character play, it's about a very light-skinned man. Guess who that was? The play's called Yellow Man. It's about a very light-skinned man with a dark-skinned woman from childhood until they become engaged, right? So each of us had to play about 12 different characters in the play, which is difficult to do. So I went on a trip just to do research as an actor, and then the production got canceled, and instead these poems started coming through me. And they're beautiful poems. I was like, okay, that's some consolation, since there's a lot of, politics and drama as to why the production didn't happen. So that's actually the origin of the gospel, according to one of was that I went as an actor researching for a part, and then I ended up as a poet with a sequence of poems years later. Yeah. Yeah. So I actually went back a few times and I stayed with people. I never learned the Gullah language. I went to the Avery Center and listened to tapes of Gullah, but it was really suppressed, just like the Catalan language was suppressed there.
But even though suppressed, it persists.
It persists because people love their mother tongue. Everywhere you go in the world, people love their mother tongue.
Yes. Question.
What is your specific heritage?
My specific heritage, I'm African American. Both my parents are African American. My father looked Arab, I think. He had very black hair, very black eyes. As it turns out, my great-grandfather Victor was alive, and he told me that the Cassells, my last name, family are descendants from a French Virginia planter whose last name was Cassell, and his slave woman Rachel. So I'm actually my roots are from Virginia, right? My mother was African American, but was extremely light-skinned and could have, quote, passed, as they say. She looked like she was white. So when I was growing up, people assumed that my parents were an interracial couple. And this was in the 60s, so everywhere we went, it was like a little, that kind of guess who's coming to dinner, like, oh, and this is your father? I go, yeah. So it was interesting that even though I knew my parents were both African American, I understand now as an adult that psychically, whenever I went out publicly with my parents, people thought they were an interracial couple. And what we forget was that it was illegal. If you saw the Loving movie, when my parents were young, being interracial marriage was illegal in this state and a few other places. So it was very dramatic, right? And I have a lot of Irish. My white ancestry is mostly Irish, Scottish, and UK. So both my grandmothers had Irish maiden names, Mitchell and Butler. So like Obama, when I went to Ireland, I thought, oh, wait a second. My people, it's like, yeah, I'm not black Irish like that, but so most of my white ancestry, my mother's maiden name was Williston, very British. My mother's family were British Jews, actually. I finally asked my older cousins, I said, we are partly Jewish, right? They said, yes. I talked to the poetry critic Marjorie Perloff. She said the Jews in the South became Episcopalian. I thought, bingo, my grandfather was Episcopal deacon. So that's stuff I have yet to explore. I haven't done the DNA thing yet. I should, because usually there's some surprises, right? So that's as far as I know. Before Roots, my great-grandfather sat me down and said, you are descended from Cassell the planter, and that's like in the 18th century. And maybe Thomas Jefferson as well. The Cassells married the Woodsons, and the Woodsons are supposedly the descendants of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson. So I got all sorts of stuff going on in there.
So why Catalan then?
Oh, interesting. I had a writer's block. And also, when I was your age, I got this crazy notion in my head that Barcelona was where I needed to be. I used to do things like that when I was your age, like, oh, I'm moving to Barcelona. I don't know why, I just think it's like the bomb or something, right? So I got myself there, and I discovered that it was the bomb, but I really didn't need to live there. So I met a lot of poets, including Francesc. This is like 30 years ago. I met Francesc. I also found an article in the Village Voice in New York by the main translator of Catalan poetry, David Rosenthal. And I was so excited, I contacted the Village Voice. I said, well, how do I get a hold of these Catalan books that he translated? He said, well, just call David. And I went to David's apartment. I bought the books from him. He gave me the numbers of Catalan poets there. So I don't understand why I suddenly got this notion that Barcelona was it. But it's a decision that's been reverberating in my life for many years. And because I'm from Southern California mostly, right? I grew up in the military at Edwards Air Force Base. I already knew, I was like the top Spanish student in my school. So half the words of Catalan are almost exactly the same as Spanish, and the other half are closer to French or the old Provençal, like Occitan language there. So I learned to read. I've never really learned to speak it well. Our book is finally coming out in the spring, and I'm probably going to go to Barcelona. So maybe it's time to up my Catalan. If you've heard it, it sounds rather different from Spanish. It has the the least amount of vowel endings of a Romance language. Like, yo soy catalano, yo soy catalá. You know, it sounds really different. It sounds a little bit more like Greek sometimes to me. There's a lot of L sounds and hard C sounds. So what I've tried to do, I teach a course called Literary Barcelona, where I try and spread the gospel of Catalan literature there. But even when I did that, the people in the Spanish department thought I was a Catalan independentista separatist person. There's a lot of intensity in Spain still. So what I did this summer for our volume, I went back to Barcelona to talk with Francesc about the violent referendum in October and to learn what had happened, because it was also dramatic. They tried to vote for independence, and then the Spanish police came in, and it looks like something from RoboCop, where they all have these, they went into the polling places and they took the polls and they actually like beat people over the head. It was a bad moment for democracy in Europe that day. And there are a lot of arguments for and against independence, but I felt since Francisc is a major independentista person, that he needed to say something about it, just to contemporize the book, because we did most of our work maybe 10 years ago. So I had a fun 4 days of spending time with him. He took me to his beach apartment near Sitges, which you may know is beautiful, in Vilanova i la Geltrú, right? And then he showed footage of the referendum with the cops coming in, and his partner said, "Oh yeah, they almost knocked him out." I go, "Oof," because the polling places are often schools, and his polling place was a school across from his apartment. So it's scary. It's kind of scary stuff. It still feels like the remnants of the Spanish Civil War. All those factions fighting there. So I tried to be, as I talked to different people about it, because some other friends said, well, don't just be like the independentista point of view. Let's see what other people had to say. And there are arguments for, of course, staying in. But it was imposed upon them, right? So I went to Catalonia this summer, and Francesc says to me, welcome to occupied Catalonia. That was a little bit chilling. On the wall, there was some graffiti. It says, we are a nation, right? And then crossed out in Spanish, no, you're not a nation, in Spanish, you know? You know? So there were some moments like that, and there are yellow ribbons all over Catalonia in solidarity with the political prisoners, because their government was exiled, essentially. Some people were put into prison, and some people are in Belgium. So Francesc went to Belgium in, I guess it was spring, and read some poems there. So I thought, well, that's really important history. And I shared some of the poems that I translated some of the poems he read for the exiled government there. So as you know, the problem is that when people say Spain, they think of only Castilian. And there are 4 different languages in Spain. There's Castilian, there's Catalan in the northeast. There's the Basque language, Euskara. Nobody knows where that's from, actually. It's not connected to any other language. And the Galician language, which is close to Portuguese, in Galicia, which is just above Portugal there. So I just got lucky in terms of coming upon a group of people who are powerful, interesting writers. I translated their main writer, Salvador Espriu. So the other book I have coming out is my tribute to him of his fiction, poetry, and play, poems I've written for him over the years, a memoir, and then scholarly things about my relationship with Espriu there. So, and because I translated their main writer, I do get this sort of VIP treatment, like I'm a cultural ambassador. And I'm kind of reclaiming that it's important to get their perspective out there, given this idea that anyone who has an independence movement is kind of like a crackpot person, but they don't understand the linguistic history where their language was banned, and why they might want to have an independent culture or country. They're complex issues, especially with Russia attempting to destabilize Europe. People could argue like, oh, your independence movement is playing into that scenario, which may be partially true as well. You know, life is complicated. Politics are complicated there. But I'm glad you seem like you might have some awareness of Catalan or Barcelona. Barcelona is one of the great lively cities in the world, so you got to go there at some point. I wasn't wrong about that. You know, it's just, it's beautiful. The architecture is unique. It's got that Art Nouveau more than any other place in the world from like late 19th century, early 20th century. I had a half an hour to go to the Sagrada Familia, which is the Gaudi. You know, I went to meet with the cultural people in Barcelona. I had like an afternoon. They were down the street from the Sagrada Familia. Structures like you've never seen anywhere. They're so wild and out there. So it's a special place, but people don't understand the more serious side of what the Catalans have gone through, because it's all really fun, and you know, it's a sexy town, and you know, the Ramblas are great and lively. So I just got lucky that I did actually choose Barcelona, and I get to go back occasionally. There's a long story about that. As a translator, that's why I'm doing a memoir, because I'm one of the few people that ever met Salvador Espriu, their main writer, their Nobel candidate person, because he was so reclusive. Francesc Parcerisas never met him, but I got an evening with him, and then he died maybe like 4 months later. He met me and another poet my age. I was like 26 then. And we thought it was going to be a very formal meeting. You know, he was all these incredible things. He was a Kabbalistic scholar. He was an Egyptologist. What I didn't know at the time was that he refused to work in Spanish. He never was in a situation where he had to speak Spanish. He was a notary republic, right? So he was away from the action in some ways. And yet in the 60s, someone set his poems to music. And then he became like a folk cultural. This singer named Raymond set his poems to music, and all of a sudden he was like this public, he was like the king of Catalan poetry, with no effort from him to publicize himself there. So we thought it would be like a half an hour, and I apologized to him because I couldn't speak Catalan. I said, I'll have to speak to you in Spanish. And he said, well, you know, my English translations are maybe some of my favorite. He said he'd get back to me. Of course, that didn't happen because he passed away. So I have yet to really talk, you know, as a legacy to Catalan, to talk about my meeting with him, because it was so dramatic and fun. He brought his friends over. It was the week of the Nobel Prizes, and his friends were saying, well, you're our candidate. He goes, they'll never give it to a stateless language, right? And they got out their cigars and their chocolates. And he was like really relaxed. And we were so worried. It was like going to see The Wizard of Oz. You know? You know, it was like, he was in the Passeig de Gracia, the fanciest part of Barcelona, and we came, and like I said, we thought it'd be a half an hour. It was like 4.5 hours I spent with him. So, yeah, Lauren.
I wanted to ask you, because I know I got to ask all these questions, but you have all of this stuff and you write poems, which are like, yee. Tell us a little bit about what makes a poem a vessel, or an act vessel?
A vessel?
For all of these stories and histories and lost languages. Like, what do you think about, what is it about the form of poetry that makes it good for that?
Who was it that said poetry is news that stays news? Is that William Carlos? It sounds really pithy and great. We should have a t-shirt that says poetry is news that stays news. Well, when I think about poetry, I was thinking about spiritual and emotional access, right? I didn't expect to be a poet growing up. I wasn't trained to be a poet. I was trained to be an actor and a filmmaker and a theater person. So in some ways, it's still a bit of a mystery. Like, what are you doing exactly? All I know is I'm a very sound-oriented person. My brothers are musicians, rock musicians. Really, they are. They're like heavy metal. This is a funny story. My youngest brother was in a black Christian heavy metal band called Seventh Seal. And so, Seventh Seal, yeah. And someone in South America, there's a cult of people who love my brother's band from the 80s. So they're offering a documentary film of the reunion plus an album, right? So, and my other brother does music that's kind of like, I guess they call it alternative, whatever. So a lot of music in my family. My father was a good singer, and I played the clarinet for 8 or 9 years. So I think the musicality of poetry, I find when I read regular prose, I'm not tapping my toe, but James Gallivan, who did a beautiful, beautiful memoir called The Meadow, one of the most beautiful books of prose ever, said, you know, prose is like methadone and poetry is like heroin or something. You know? I don't know. I mean, I don't have any way of verifying that analogy, but it's how I make sense of all of this stuff. I don't always know what I'm doing as a writer. I was talking to the workshop earlier. Usually I find that your poetry making self is 2 or 3 years ahead of your regular, everyday self. So look to your poetry and your art making for clues as to who you are and where you're going. Like when I had a writer's block for 2 years after my first book, and the first thing I did was the Catalan translations, and that helped get the machinery going again. Because I kind of found, I think when you have blocks, it means there's an imbalance in your life or world. And I've been kind of a prodigy type student. You know, I went to Stanford and I got all A's in school. That's what I did, right? And then, but I realized I wasn't very socially developed. Suddenly I had a book and I was a public person, and I was going to events like this at your age, and people were asking me questions like I was a wise person, and I just felt like a fraud. I just felt like, why are you're asking me questions about your love life? I just broke up with my boyfriend and girlfriend at the same time, you know? I was like the scandal of town. I had a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and I broke up with them at the same time. And I came to Kentucky, and it's like people ask me, like they wanted advice. I'm thinking, you've come to the wrong person. So I stopped giving readings and talks and doing anything publicly for about 5 years until I was about 30, and I was teaching because I felt like, oh, this is too much. People expect me to be some kind of a maven person, right? So I had to grow into my role as a poet. But I really felt like at that time I hadn't developed enough socially to do what I do now, which is like I'm able to talk to you. Believe it or not, when I was young, I was a very shy person. I was very serious. And my dad called me Sirius instead of Cyrus. No one believes it now. No one believes it now because doing things like this for many years completely opened me up as a social person. Before there was like, I just couldn't do things like this. I was just too shy there. So it's a vehicle for socializing too and getting to know people and being in the world and being okay about expressing yourself, right?
Thank you. We're going to make that the last.
Okay.
Give him a rousing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you.